Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live here as Shabbat evening is about to begin. But just before Shabbat gets started here, I wanted to share with you guys a few things very troubling. Syria war. Russia rejects Turkey's calls for Idlib truce. Now, of course, Erdogan is not really looking at a realistic truce. He has got some very awkward ideas about what he considers to be a truce, which would be to evacuate all of the jihadists in the region. But in the event of an assault by the Syrian government and backed by Russian airstrikes, he refuses to allow any Syrian refugees to enter into his country. That's rather discouraging to me, though, when I look at this, because why is it that Erdogan is only interested in rescuing jihadists and murderers, and instead the Syrian people, who are the ones that really pay the ultimate price for these wars, they're just still going to be left there as guinea pigs for the war. Very troubling, isn't it? He sounds a lot like the State Department with Nikki Haley and all these other thugs that continue to talk about the false chemical weapons attack that they say that the Syrian government is planning and that they're going to have to pay. Well, in fact, they're going a bit further now, just in case someone fails to pull off the chemical weapons attack. Now they're leaning more towards any escalation whatsoever in the Idlib province could cause some intervention. Since when do we allow other countries just to take over another nation without any retribution whatsoever? As I pointed out before, and I even stated to Mike Pompeo on his own Twitter page here, when he was also condemning the Syrian government for liberating Idlib from these terrorist groups, would we actually do this to our own nation if we were overran by terrorists and we had regained our country back, but maybe New Hampshire or Alabama or some other state was still infested with all the jihadists? Will we just let that state go and allow the jihadists to fully rule in there, and we'll say, okay, we got 49 states, we'll let them keep the 50th state? There's no way. You know, if the rest of the world was crying about, oh my gosh, it might cause a humanitarian crisis. Well, what the United States and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, as well as even some unfortunate influence by my own people Israel has done, has caused a humanitarian crisis to begin with. Arming and equipping all these terrorists from 35 plus nations to come in here to overthrow a country and to try to take out one man, Bashar al-Assad. And don't kid yourself, that's not off the table either. They're still working on a way to assassinate him if he doesn't go peacefully. And as everyone keeps talking about, as far as in the background that I hear from, he's not going to be allowed to stay in power no matter what comes at the end of this day. You know, forget what the people have to say of Syria. They have no say-so. They have no vote. They have no rights whatsoever. It's whatever the thugs and dictators that want to take and divide up this land, it's their saying, not the people saying. No wonder why God condemns Israel, and that's not the country of Israel per se. He clearly identifies in Isaiah 17 that Israel has forgotten her God and is not mindful of the rock of her salvation. That's both Jew and Christian alike that have allowed the fall and demise of Damascus as a result of our negligence to God's word and to God himself, and even to the rock of his salvation, which is Yeshua himself. Very troubling indeed as we watch these things unfold here. Also, we have an alert coming in. The U.S. Marines launch a live fire drill. I don't know if this is the actual alert itself because it changed in the process while I was loading this, but let's listen in on this. This does include some of the information from the U.S. side on Fox News about the escalating situation there in the Middle East.
This is another Fox News alert. Syria on the brink. Urgent concerns tonight that U.S. forces and Russian forces could get entangled in a shooting war, possibly on the ground in Syria. Syrian government troops backed by forces from Russia and Iran may be about to launch a final offensive designed to crush the remaining opposition in the country's 7-year civil war. The U.S. is warning of dire consequences if that assault happens and has mobilized. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the latest tonight from the Pentagon.
A dangerous armed standoff tonight in southern Syria with U.S. and Russian forces warning each other to stand aside. In a rare show of force, a company of U.S. Marines carried out an air assault backed by artillery in the southern Syrian desert in what U.S. defense officials are calling a stern message to Russia, back off. That message ignored as the leaders of Iran, Russia, and Turkey met in Tehran today. A last-minute effort to hammer out a ceasefire failed as Russian President Vladimir Putin teamed up with Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, who said the fight in Syria should continue until all extremists are uprooted, and then called for the U.S. to leave the country.
The illegal presence and intervention by America in Syria, which has led to the continuation of instability, must immediately end.
We consider any assault on Idlib to be a dangerous escalation of the conflict in Syria. Airstrikes by Russia and the regime have already begun against civilian areas.
Idlib province is the last remaining rebels.
One thing that was very troubling when Nikki Haley actually spoke at the United Nations Security Council is being convened there is that she implied that the Russians were there to target all the civilians, every man, woman, and child, and that they were all considered terrorists. That's always been totally false and erroneous statement, especially in light of the fact that the Russian government, along with the Syrian government, have both worked tirelessly before the offensive has even begun to open up and to negotiate corridors for humanitarian purposes to get the civilian population to have the opportunity to leave this area. But of course, as anyone would know, these soldiers that are going to fight, or these terrorists, I should say, that are going to fight against the Syrian government that wants to maintain this particular province for the purpose of Turkey to maybe broaden their own borders, will not allow all these civilians to be able to leave the area. As always, only a very few can get out. And in fact, as we were seeing multiple reports, that if you tried to leave, that the fighting factions then would consider it a treasonous act. Syrian civilians not allowed to leave, but yet will be kept behind so that they have more of a body count, so that they can use that for the world media to be able to justify the massive assault that will be conducted by the U.S., France, and Great Britain, and possibly even Turkey, because Turkey is not going to stand down. You have to remember, the insider that we spoke with here on Israeli News Live about a year or so ago was sharing with us that Turkey, that Prime Minister or President Erdogan was giving a great deal in a New World Order if he was willing to do the dirty work in the Middle East here. Well, he has certainly held true to his colors from what we can tell. Moving on as well, Erdogan will continue to work for a permanent solution in Syria, according to Sputnik News there, but it doesn't look like anything's going to really come out of that to start with. And he talks about how that they have always tried to limit the amount of bloodshed. Well, why didn't he think about that when he went into Afrin? In the little province of Afrin here, just up here on the northern part of your border, Turkey paid no mind to the Kurds that were there, overrun this city here, and now the Turkish government has all of this area, all the way up to Azaz. In that area there, they have overtaken it, as well as the jihadists all the way down here to Idlib. So this is where the issue comes in. Turkey doesn't want to give it up because it would give them a nice big buffer zone and give them more land to control as they take over also the northern part of Syria and all those regions there. So they're trying their best. Even Mumbai as well, another province that the Turkish have taken over. Turkey expanding its borders down into the side of Syria, and they don't want to relinquish anything, especially Idlib. This is why they're fighting so hard to maintain it. And of course, It wouldn't take a whole lot to cause this war to be a strike on Turkish forces that will bring NATO in like the great saviors that they will make themselves out to be. Now, of course, it's troubling for me because as an American citizen, I hate to see American soldiers in harm's way either. They are our people, and that's something that's a major concern. But it's so sad to see that American soldiers, their lives will be put at risk all because of a new world order that is bent to destroy Syria as well as Lebanon, Iraq, Iran. Remember, of course, as General Wesley Clark told us, they would take down those 7 nations. It's all about a new world order. It's all about a Silk Road for a major economy change. And by the way, that's the only reason why Trump is even seeing an economy change is because it will be a Silk Road. Oh, don't worry. It's only a bluff and smoke and mirrors, this big issue between a trade war with China and the United States. It all works out at the end of the day. We're just given that as a pony, what do they call it, a pony and dog show? I think that's about what we're going to get to see there. Last thing but not least here, in a troubling issue that keeps coming out with Israel, that again, I really held back when I saw the different images coming out of Syria where we had arms that were being placed inside of Syria, different militant groups that had showed those videos, the different things that the Syrian government, as they captured strongholds, and we kept seeing a lot of Israeli-made weapon supplies inside of Syria. Well, I realized that those videos and those photographs could have been staged, and I kind of held back in exposing that, what Israel had been doing inside of Syria, until the Jerusalem Post finally came out and exposed, because not just exposed, but the IDF admitted to arming and funding these Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra terrorists inside of Syria. And of course, the Israeli government pulled that post off of there through censorship and would not allow it. Now Sputnik has come out with an article. Israel evacuated Islamist commanders from Syria alongside white helmets. Well, that doesn't surprise me a bit in the world because many of these terrorist commanders that also play on the side as white helmets too. A new report gets dirty on the details of Israeli funding and weapons shipments to 12 anti-government extremist groups in Syria. Buried in the end of a piece is the revelation that Israel helped evacuate the so-called rebel commanders as they also flew out members of the self-proclaimed impartial White Helmets organization. On August the 22nd, Israel evacuated some 800 members of the White Helmets group funded by the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and the Western countries that claims to be an impartial civil defense organization, but it has been accused by Syria, Russia of terrorism. Its members have been caught on video grinning wildly as a child nearby was being beheaded, in addition to other atrocities, while a high-budget film about the group won the 2017 Academy Award for Best Documentary. Maybe they should have got a Best Actors Award instead of Best Documentary. Again, it shows just how much the propaganda machine in the United States will go to in order to convince the American people that what we are doing in Syria, as it was in the case of Iraq, was the right thing. And going back to Iraq, if you think about it, why did we ever invade Iraq in the first place? I thought it was the Saudis that were responsible for the downing of the Twin Towers. Remember? All these men on board, their passports, etc., or the majority of them were from the Saudi kingdom. But no, we decided to target Iraq of all places. Had nothing to do with the Saudis, but that's okay. Don't want to mess with the Saudis. After all, they're one of the biggest weapon buyers for the United States. And of course, we get our gas and oil from them in such huge quantities. And speaking of the other thing about gas and oil, well, what it really comes down to at the end of the day when Syria is involved is to galvanize and secure the oil fields, the gas and the gas pipelines to all flow from that Middle East, and instead of going through the Saudi Arabia and through the Persian Gulf area there, We need to have it all come through Israel and Lebanon there to the ports there on the Mediterranean Sea. It would also limit the amount of distance that we need to go. And don't kid yourself, that is also part of the Silk Road Initiative. Yes, to be able to limit the distance that we have to transport oil and gas for not only Europe, but also the United States. Think about how much faster and how much billions of dollars would be saved if we can just take the oil crude right out of Israel's port in Haifa, right to the United States. But you have to remember, Syria was not a willing partner in allowing that to happen in the beginning. They were willing to work with Russia, but not with the United States, because after all, they didn't have that great of a relationship with the U.S. Maybe also, too, Bashar al-Assad heard General Wesley Clark's statement that they're going to take his nation down. So I would think that my trust level would be a bit low as well. After all, we are headed to a new world order. So everybody, all the players involved, they will play their parts. We'll just have to wait and see. But the showdown, I believe, is about to unravel right before our eyes. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. As the eve of Shabbat approaches, Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, Happy New Year for those that celebrate it at this time of year. I still kind of like what Moses said, Nisan 1, as God commanded him in the book of Exodus, that would be the head of our new year. But nonetheless, Israel celebrates it this time of year. So Shana Tova.